Hi, welcome back. We are ready to begin our next day read aloud. We're reading Refugee by Ellen Gratz. Remember that he gave us permission to read the book and share it with you while we're apart during the virtual learning environment that we have right now. We're ready to start our next chapter with Mahmoud. He's in Izmir, Turkey in 2015, about 11 days from home. So I'm going to get started. Mahmoud screamed. He howled louder than a fighter jet, and his parents didn't even tell him to hush. Lights came on in the houses nearby, and curtains ruffled as people looked out at the noise. Mahmoud's mother broke down in tears, and his father let the life jackets he carried drop to the ground. The smuggler had just told them their boat wasn't leaving tonight. Again. No boat today. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, he told Mahmoud's father. Tomorrow, it'll come. It was exactly the same thing he told Mahmoud's father the day before, and the day before that, and every day for the last week. A text would come telling them to hurry, hurry, out to the beach, and every time they would pack up what few things they owned, grab the life vests, and rush through the streets of Izmir to this parking lot, and every time there would be no boat waiting for them. First, it was the weather, the smuggler said. Then another family was supposed to go with them, hadn't arrived. Then it was the Turkish Coast Guard patrols, or the boat wasn't ready. There was always some reason, some excuse they couldn't leave. It was like some cruel schoolyard game of keep away. Mahmoud and his family were at their wits' end. This off and on again business was tearing them apart, all except for Walid, lifeless Walid, who didn't flinch when bombs exploded. I want to go back to Syria. I don't care if we die, Mahmoud said after he'd let out his scream. I just want to get out of here. Even as he said it, he heard the whine in his voice and the pathetic toddler-like frustration. Part of him was embarrassed. He was older than that, more mature. He was almost a man. But another part of him just wanted to stomp his feet and pitch a fit, and that part of him was getting harder and harder to keep quiet. Little Hannah started crying too, and Mahmoud's mother tried to calm them both by pulling Mahmoud into a hug. Look at it this way, Dad said. Now we have more time to practice our Turkish. No one laughed. Let's get back to the mall before someone takes our place, Mom said wearily. Mahmoud carried the life jacket so his father could carry Walid, who quickly fell asleep in his father's shoulder. His mother carried Hannah. Even though Mahmoud hated the desperate feeling of defeat in going back to the mall, at least it meant not sleeping outside in the park. But this time, someone was waiting for them at the mall entrance. There were two of them, both Turkish men, in matching blue tracksuits. One of them was muscular with curly black hair, a thin beard, and a thick gold necklace. The other was overweight and wore mirrored sunglasses, even though it was night. He was the one with the pistol stuck in the waist of his pants. You want inside, you gotta pay rent, the burly man told them. Since when? Mahmoud's father said. Since now, the man said. We own this building and we're tired of you Syrians freeloading. More bullies, thought Mahmoud, just like in Syria. Mahmoud's legs went numb and he thought he might fall over. He couldn't bear the thought of walking any further, looking for a place to live again. How much? Mahmoud's father asked wearily. 5,000 pounds a night, a muscular man said. Dad sighed and started to put Walid down so he could pay the man. Each, the man said. Each per night? Dad said. Mahmoud knew his dad was going to do the math in his head. There were 5 of them, and they'd already been here a week. How long could they afford to pay 25,000 pounds a day and still have enough for the boat and whatever came afterward? No, Mahmoud's father said. Mom started to protest, but he shook his head. No, we already have all of our things. We'll find a place else to stay. It's only until tomorrow. The big man chuckled. Right, tomorrow. Mahmoud staggered along behind his parents as they roamed the streets of Izmir, looking for some place to sleep. His parents carried Walid and Hannah, but not him. He was too old to be carried anymore, and for the first time, he wished he wasn't. They finally found the doorway of a travel agency set back from the street, and no one else was sleeping there. They were just settling in when a Turkish police car came down the street. Mahmoud shrank back into the corner, trying to be invisible, but the police car's lights came on it and beeped its electronic siren at them. Blurt, blurt! You can't sleep there, a police officer told them. through a loudspeaker, and so they had to get up and walk again. Mahmoud was so tired he started to cry, but he did it softly so his parents wouldn't hear. He hadn't cried like this since the first night when the bombs had started to fall in Aleppo. Another car came down the road, and at first Mahmoud worried it was another police car, but it was a BMW sedan. On a whim, Mahmoud darted out into the car's headlights and waved the life jackets on his arms. "Mahmoud, no!" his mother cried. The BMW slowed, its lights bright in his face. The driver honked at him, and Mahmoud hurried around to the driver's side window. "Please, can you help us?" Mahmoud begged. "My baby sister." But the car was already shooting away. Another car followed it, and it drove right past Mahmoud. "Mahmoud, get out of the street," his father called. "You'll get yourself killed." Mahmoud didn't care anymore. There had to be someone who would help them. He waved the life jackets at the next car, and miraculously it stopped. It was an old brown Skoda. The driver rolled the window down by hand. He was an elderly, wrinkled man with a short white beard, and he wore a black and white kifua headscarf. "Please, can you help us?" Mahmoud asked. "My family and I have nowhere to go, and my sister is only a baby." Dad jogged up and tried to pull Mahmoud away. "We're very sorry," Mahmoud's father told the man. "We didn't mean to bother you. We'll be on our way." Mahmoud was annoyed. He'd finally gotten somebody to stop, and now his father was trying to send them away? "My house is too small for all of you," the man said, "but I have a little car dealership, and you can stay in the office." Arabic! Mahmoud was thrilled. The man spoke fluent Arabic. No, we couldn't possibly," Mahmoud's father started to say, but Mahmoud cut him off. "Yes, thank you," Mahmoud cried. He waved his mother over. "He speaks Arabic, and he says he will help us." Dad tried to apologize again and refused the offer of help, but Mahmoud was already climbing in the back seat with a load of life jackets. Mom got in beside him with Hannah, and Mahmoud's father shifted Walid in his arms so he could reluctantly sit in the front passenger seat. "Mahmoud," his father said, unhappy. But Mahmoud didn't care. They were off their feet, and they were on their way to some place they could sleep. The little Skoda's gears ground as the man got them underway. "My name is Sima Nasser," the man told him, and Mahmoud's father introduced them all. "You are Syrian, yes? Refugees?" The man asked. "I know what it's like. I am a refugee too, from Palestine." Mahmoud frowned. This man was a refugee, and he owned his own car and his own business. "How long have you lived in Turkey?" Mahmoud asked Mr. Nasir. 67 years now," Mr. Nasir said, smiling at Mahmoud in the rearview mirror. "I was forced to leave my home in 1948 during the first Arab-Israeli war. They were still fighting there, but someday, when my homeland is restored, I will go home again." Dad's phone chimed, surprising them all and making Walid stir. His father read the glowing screen. "It's the smuggler. He says the boat is ready now." Mahmoud had learned not to get too excited about these texts, but even so, he still felt a little flutter of hope in his chest. "You take a boat to Greece tonight?" Mr. Nasir asked. "Maybe," Mahmoud's father said, "if it's there." "I will take you to it," Mr. Nasir said, "and if it is not there, you can come back and stay with me." "Oh, you're very kind," Mom said. Mahmoud didn't know why, but his mother pulled Mahmoud close and gave him a hug. It took very little time for the car to take them back to the beach, and when they pulled to the stop, they were all quiet and as they stared. This time, finally, a boat was there. Well, we had a brief interruption because I had somebody at the door and I had to go get the door. So let's start with chapter 2, our next chapter, Joseph. He's somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean in 1939, and he's about 14 days from home. A day out from Cuba, the St. Louis threw a party. Streamers and balloons hung from the ceiling and decorated the gallery rails of the first-class social hall. Chairs and tables were pushed aside to make room for dancers. There was a feeling of wild relief as though they were dancing away all the stress of leaving Germany. The steward smiled with the passengers as though they understood, but none of them could really understand, Joseph thought. Not until their shop windows had been smashed and their businesses had been shut down. Not until the newspapers and radio talked about them as subhuman monsters. Not until shadowy men had burst into their homes and smashed up their things and dragged away someone they loved. Not until they had been told to leave their homeland and never, ever come back. Still, Joseph enjoyed the party. He danced with his mother while Ruthie, Renata, and Evelyn ran in and out between people's legs all evening long. Joseph had been nervous about Cuba at first, scared of the unknown. But now he was excited to reach Havana, to start a new life, especially if it was like this. Joseph's father stayed hidden away in their cabin the whole night, sure this was all just another Nazi trick. The next morning, breakfast in the ship's dining room was interrupted by the thundering, clanking sound of the anchors being dropped. Joseph ran to the window. Dawn had broken, and Joseph could see the Malecon, Havana's famous seaside avenue. The stewards had told them all about its theaters and casinos and restaurants and the Miramar Hotel, where all the waiters wore tuxedos. But the St. Louis was still a long way off from there. For some reason, the ship had anchored kilometers out from shore. It's for the medical quarantine, a doctor from Frankfurt explained to the small crowd who had gathered with Joseph at the porthole to look at Cuba. I saw them run up the yellow flag this morning before breakfast. We just have to be approved by the port's medical authorities first. Standard procedure. Joseph made sure he was on deck when the first boat from the Havana Port Authority reached the St. Louis. The Cuban man who climbed the ladder to sea deck from the launch was deeply tanned and wore a lightweight white suit. Joseph watched as Captain Schroeder and the ship's doctor met the man as he came aboard. The captain swore an oath that none of the passengers was insane, a criminal, or had a contagious disease. That was apparently all that should have been required, because when the port doctor insisted he still be allowed to examine each and every passenger, Captain Schroeder looked very angry. He balled his fist and breathed deeply, but he didn't object. He gave a curt order to the ship's doctor to assemble the passengers in the social hall and then marched away. Joseph ran back to his cabin and burst in on his mother, packing the last of their things. Ruthie was helping her while Papa lay on the bed. The doctor from Cuba, he's going to make all the passengers go through a medical examination, Joseph told his mother, still panting from his run. They're gathering everybody in the social hall right now. Mama's shocked look told him she understood. Papa was not well. What if the Cuban doctor said he was too mentally disturbed to be allowed into Havana? Where would they go if Cuba turned them away? What would they do? Gathering us? Papa said. He looked even more frightened by the prospect than Joseph's mother had. Like a roll call. He stood up and backed against a wall. No, he said, no. The things that happened at roll call, the hangings, the floggings, the drownings, the beatings. He wrapped his arms around himself, and Joseph knew his father was talking about that place, Dachau. Joseph and his mother stood like statues, afraid to break the spell. Once I saw another man shot dead with a rifle, his father whispered. He was standing right beside me. And I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound, or I would be next. It's not like that. It's not going to be like that, dear heart, Mama said. She reached out to him, tentatively, gently, and he didn't flinch under her hand. You were strong once before in that place. You just need to be strong again. And then we'll be in Cuba. We'll be saved forever, all of us. Together. It was clear to Joseph that his father was still lost in his memories of Dachau as they led him to the social hall. Papa looked frightened, jittery. It scared Joseph when his father got this way, but he was even more scared that the doctor would see Papa's condition and turn them away. Joseph and his family joined the other passengers standing in rows, and the doctor walked among them. Papa stood beside Joseph. And as the doctor got closer, Joseph's father began to make a low, keening sound, like a wounded dog. Papa was starting to attract the attention of the passengers around him. Joseph felt a bead of sweat roll down his back underneath his shirt, and Ruthie cried softly. Be strong, my love, Joseph heard his mother whisper to his father. Be strong like you were before. But I wasn't, Joseph's father blubbered. I wasn't strong. I was just lucky. It could have been me. Should have been me. The Cuban doctor was getting closer. Joseph had to do something, but what? His father was inconsolable. The things he said he saw, Joseph couldn't even begin to imagine. His father had only survived by staying quiet, but not drawing attention to himself. But now he was going to get them sent away. Suddenly, Joseph saw what he had to do. He slapped his father across the face, hard. Papa staggered in surprise, and Joseph felt just as shocked as his father's look. Joseph couldn't believe what he had just done. 6 months ago, he would never have dreamed of striking any adult, let alone his father. Papa would have punished him for such disrespect, but in the past 6 months, Joseph and his father had traded places. Papa was the one acting like a child, and Joseph was the adult. Mama and Ruthie stared at Joseph, stunned, but he ignored them and pulled his father back in line. Do you want the Nazis to catch you? Do you want them to send you back to that place? Joseph hissed at Papa. No, his father said, still dazed. That man there, Joseph whispered, pointing to the doctor, he's a Nazi in disguise. He decides who goes back to Dachau. He decides who lives and who dies. If you're lucky, he won't choose you, but if you speak, if you move, if you make even the slightest sound, he will pull you out of line, send you back. Do you understand? Joseph's father nodded urgently. Beside him, Mama put a hand on her mouth and wept, but she didn't say anything. Now clean yourself up, quickly, Joseph told his father. Aaron Landau dropped his wife's hands, dragged his oversized coat sleeve across his face, and stood rigidly, at attention, eyes forward, like a prisoner. The doctor came down their row, looking at each person in turn. When he got to Papa, Joseph held his breath. The doctor looked Joseph's father up and down, then moved on. Joseph sagged with relief. They'd made it. His father had passed the doctor's inspection. Joseph closed his eyes and fought back tears of his own. He felt terrible for scaring his father like that, for making Papa's fears worse instead of better, and he felt terrible for taking his father's place as the man in the family. All Joseph's life, he had looked up to his father, idolized him. Now it was hard to see him as anything but a broken old man. But all that would change when they got off the ship and into Cuba. Then everything would go back to normal. They would find a way to fix his father. The Cuban doctor finished his rounds and nodded to the ship's doctor that he approved all the passengers. Joseph's mother wrapped his father in a hug, and Joseph felt his heart lift. For the first time all afternoon, he felt hope. Well, that was a sham, said the man standing in the line next to him. What do you mean? Joseph said. That was no kind of medical inspection. The entire business was a charade, a giant waste of time. Joseph didn't quite understand. If it wasn't a proper medical inspection, what had it all been for? He understood when he and his family lined up at the ladder on sea deck to leave the ship. The Cuban doctor was gone. He had left Cuban police officers behind in his place. They were blocking the only way off the ship. We've passed our medicals, and we have all the right papers, a woman passenger said to the police. When will we be allowed into Havana? Mañana, the policeman said in Spanish. Mañana. Joseph didn't speak Spanish. He didn't know what mañana meant. Tomorrow, one of the passengers translated for them. Not today. Tomorrow. Isabel, the Straits of Florida, somewhere north of Cuba, 1994. One day from home. Isabel hit the water and sank into the warm Gulf Stream. It was pitch black all around her, and the ocean was alive. Not alive with fish, alive like the ocean was a living creature itself. It churned and roiled and roared with bubbles and foam. It beat at her, pushing her and pulling her like a cat playing with a mouse it was about to eat. Isabel fought her way back to the surface and gasped for air. Isabel! Her mother shrieked, her arms stretching out for her. But there was no way her mother could reach her. The boat was already so far away. Isabel panicked. How was it so far away already? We have to get the boat turned, Isabel heard Luis cry. If we don't meet the waves head on, they'll roll us over. Dad, Ivan yelled. Isabel spun in the water, and a wave slammed into her, filling her mouth and nose with salty water and sweeping her under again. The wave passed, and she broke the surface, gagging and choking, but she was already moving toward the place where she had seen Senor Castillo's head before it went under. Her hand struck something in the dark water, and Isabel recoiled until she realized it was Senor Castillo. The sea was tossing him around, but he wasn't moving on his own, wasn't fighting to get back out of the water. Isabel took in as much air as she could and dove down beneath an oncoming wave. She found Senor Castillo's body in the dark, wrapped her arms around him, and kicked as hard as she could for the surface. The ocean fought her, sweeping her legs out from under her and spinning her all around. But Isabel kicked until her lungs were about to burst, and at last she exploded up into the cold air, gasping. There they are, Ivan cried. Isabel couldn't even try to look for the boat. It was all she could do to keep Senor Castillo's lolling head above the water and catch quick breaths before the waves rolled over them. But the waves seemed to be smaller now, still deadly, but not as high and fast. Isabel began to feel the rhythm of the sea, the sing-song lullaby of it, and it was easy to close her eyes, to stop kicking, to stop fighting. She was so tired, so very tired. And then Ivan was there in the water with them, his arms around her like they were back in their village, playing together in the waves on the beach. Here, they're here, Ivan shouted. Their boat was now alongside her, and her head thumped into the side of it as a wave washed over her. Hands lifted Senor Castillo from her, and soon they dragged her over the side too. She splashed back down into half-meter of the water that filled the boat. But she was away from the waves and the never-ending waves, and she collapsed into her mother's arms. Rudy, oh God, Senor Castillo cried, clutching her husband's hand. Senor Castillo was unconscious. Luis and Papi had laid him out on one of the benches, and Isabel's grandfather was pumping his stomach like an accordion. Seawater burbled up and out of Senor Castillo's mouth, and he suddenly lurched, coughing and spluttering. Lido and Papi and Luis rolled him over, and he retched up the rest of the ocean he had swallowed. Rudy, Senora Castillo said. She wrapped him in her arms and sobbed, and then everything was quiet and still, but the gentle lapping of the sea against the side of the boat and the sloshing, except for the gentle lapping of the sea against the side of the boat and the sloshing of the water inside it. The tanker had passed. Amara stood at the back of the boat, keeping the rudder straight against the waves, but the engine was dead again. Like everything else, it had been swamped. Senora Castillo reached for Isabel's hand and squeezed. Thank you, Isabel, thank you. Isabel nodded, but it came out more like a shudder. She was freezing cold and soaked from head to toe, but at least she was back in her mother's arms. Mommy hugged her close, and Isabel shivered. We need to get the water out of the bottom of the boat, Papi said. It was strange to Isabel to hear her father talk about something so normal, so practical, when Senor Castillo had almost drowned and the boat had almost rolled over and sank. But he was right. And get that engine running again, Ivan said. The water first, Lido agreed, and together they gathered up bottles and jugs and began the tedious work of filling them up and pouring the seawater back into the ocean. Isabel stayed buried in her mother's arms, still exhausted, and no one made her get up. Where's the box with the medicine in it? Luis asked. There wasn't too many places it could be in the small boat, and they quickly decided it must have fallen overboard in the confusion. Gone were their aspirin and bandages, and Senor Castillo was still dazed and weak. It was bad, but if they got the boat bailed out, and if they got the engine running, and if they got back on track with the sun tomorrow, and if they didn't run into any more tankers, they would make it to the States without needing the medicine or matches. If. They bailed water the rest of the night, taking turns dozing in the uncomfortable, crowded little boat. Isabel didn't even realize she'd fallen asleep until she jerked awake from a nightmare about a giant monster coming for her out of the dark sea. She cried out, looking this way and that, but there was nothing but blue-black water and gray skies tinged with the red of the sun all around them for miles and miles and miles. She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, trying to calm down. The boat rocked again, and Amara struggled to keep the rudder steady. She had taken over as a pilot while Senor Castillo recovered, but they still hadn't gotten the motor running again. The Gulf Stream would carry them north, toward Florida, but they would need the engine to reach the shore. Isabel's mother leaned over the side of the boat and threw up into the sea. When she slid back down inside, she looked green. The boat was rocking so much now that Isabel couldn't sit on the bench without holding on. The waves were growing higher and higher. What is it? Ivan said sleepily. Another tanker? No. Red sky at morning. Sailors take warning, Lido said, looking up into the red-tinged clouds. A storm is coming. Oh, a storm on the sea. That is scary. You guys, I've enjoyed reading to you today. You know what I'm noticing is that while each child, Mahmoud, Isabel, and Joseph, are different time periods, they're all experiencing the same fear of the unknown and fleeing somewhere where they're not being treated kindly. I hope that you Grizzlies are continuing to treat each other kindly and making this a better place for each person to live in. Remember to be a safe, responsible, and respectful Grizzly, and I will see you tomorrow.